Sara had always loved late-night walks. They helped her relax after a long day, but one day her habit turned into a real horror. It was an ordinary evening in late September, and Sara was returning home on foot. Her car was under repair, so she had to walk several kilometers on country roads surrounded by dense forest. Usually she enjoyed the quiet of the night and the cool breeze, but this time she felt like someone was watching her from the darkness. Sara quickened her step, trying not to look back. She thought she heard a rustle in the bushes nearby. She reassured herself that it was just nocturnal animals, but with each step the feeling of unease grew stronger. Suddenly there was a strange sound behind her, reminiscent of the creaking of old doors, that made her heart beat harder. Sara turned around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just silent darkness. She kept walking, and she kept feeling like someone was invisibly following her. As she passed through a stretch of road where there were no street lights, she noticed a dim light in the distance. It was an old phone booth that she thought had been removed long ago. As Sara got closer, the light in the booth went out. She stopped, feeling a chill run down her spine. For a moment she thought she saw someone standing in the back of the booth, but as soon as she blinked, the vision vanished. Sara decided not to linger and walked on. Suddenly she heard the sound of a motor and turned around. An old black car slowly pulled out from around the corner with its headlights off. The car moved so quietly that it seemed like a ghost. Sara froze, not knowing what to do, but feeling an acute sense of danger. She ran down the road, trying not to look back. The car followed her, and every time Sara thought she had managed to escape, she heard the car coming closer. At one point she risked turning around and saw that the driver of the car had gotten out and was now walking slowly behind her. In the darkness his figure seemed unreal, as if distorted. His movements were slow, almost ghostly, but he kept his eyes on Sara, who felt a paralyzing fear seize her. She managed to run into the woods, where she hid behind a tree, trying to catch her breath. But just when she thought she was safe, a low voice came from the darkness, repeating her name. Sara, Sara, Sara. The voice was quiet and seemed to whisper from far away, but its tone was eerily familiar. She closed her eyes, hoping it was just a hallucination, but the sound was getting closer. Sara rushed to run further into the woods. Her heart was pounding and her fear was building. At one point she saw a dim light ahead and decided this was her chance. As she reached a small house, she saw that there was a light burning in the window. Sara knocked, but there was no answer. She opened the door ajar and entered. It was quiet inside, but the air was saturated with some strange odor that gave her goosebumps. Looking around, she realized the house was abandoned. On the table were old, yellowed newspapers, on the cover of which she saw her face. The headline read, "Missing in Action." Sara couldn't believe her eyes. The paper looked as if it had been printed years ago. Suddenly there was a creak of the floor behind her. She turned around and saw a shadow in the corner that began to slowly approach her. Sara realized that she was not alone in the house. She tried to run away, but the door she entered through was locked. She looked around for an exit, and her gait stopped on the stairs leading down to the basement. Maybe there's a way out, she thought, and without wasting time, she went down the stairs, feeling each step echoing in the empty house. The basement was even more gloomy than the rest of the house. Old portraits hung on the walls, but the faces of the people in them were distorted and stained with something dark. Suddenly, she noticed that one portrait was staring at her with eyes that seemed alive. Startled, Sara recoiled and tripped over something soft lying on the floor. It was an old doll, but its eyes were staring at her too. When Sara looked up, she saw a man in the corner of the basement. He didn't move, but his presence felt like something terrifying. She pressed herself against the wall, not knowing where to go, but then he spoke, quietly and ingratiatingly, as if he knew her secrets. He called her name, and she realized that the voice was the same one she had heard in the forest. The man walked slowly toward her, and in his eyes she could read the abyss. Sara realized that this wasn't just any man. His gaze was full of darkness, and her mind began to cloud over. She felt like she was falling into an endless darkness. At the last moment she managed to pull herself together, and with a shriek, she ran out of the basement, grabbing the nearest object to break the window. Breaking the glass noisily, she climbed out of the house and ran away in fear. When Sara turned around, she saw a dark figure on the doorstep waving at her. She felt a chill run down her spine and rushed forward, not looking back until she reached the nearest town. Sara ran and didn't look back again until she reached the nearest town. No one believed her story, but since then, every time she passes by the forest, she feels eyes on her and hears whispers from the depth of darkness calling her name.